Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the It's Just Dinner podcast. And this just happens to be our third season.
Get out.
So it's very exciting.
Where is the time
And
gone?
there he is, the voice,
Well,
Bob Walz.
it's great to be here, Tom.
It's good to have you back.
Well, thanks. Great to be back. It's great to be, back in school and have, start of the semester. It's exciting.
Exciting. Everybody's still smiling, which
Yes,
is nice.
it is.
So
Well, they haven't had a test yet. Just wait till next week.
That's fair.
welcome to Lauren, sitting at our engineering booth. Welcome, Lauren.
Hello.
It's good to have you back.
Good to be here.
We're excited about this and talking about the issues with dating
Yes.
and relationships and trying to fix them. I think Bob and I think we have all the answers. So,
Well, if we don't, no one does.
we're going to kick off this season, and I'm very excited about our guest today.
Yeah. It's always great when we
and
start the season with a live guest,
with a
especially someone
live
who's really
guest
smart,
and
somebody who's written a book.
Somebody that's an author.
Man,
Yeah,
this
it's
is-
very cool. Our guest today is Ganel-Lyn Condie, and Ganel-Lyn is an author, and she has written a great book
Yes.
called The Stewardship Principle, Reframing Your Life, a fantastic book. And she's also a motivational speaker, a podcaster, and also a television host. I mean, she's on
Good
she's on
Things
everything.
Utah.
Yeah. So
All the
welcome.
time she's
Welcome,
on.
Ganel-Lyn. How are you?
So good to be with you both and to have this conversation and to share whatever wisdom I've got to offer after 31 years of marriage and 2 kids in college dating. And so I've picked their brain
Good.
and so we'll see where the conversation goes.
Good. We're
Great.
excited. Let's just start off by talking about your book. Is this your most recent book that you've written?
Yeah, the Stewardship Principle came out in May of 2022, and it's my 9th. So December, my 10th book will be released, and it's a Christmas book.
Wow.
And I would say this is one of those books that, for me, God was like, you can't leave the earth before you write this book. And so I'm kind of relieved that it's out and on bookshelves because
Good. So now you
I
can
felt
die? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, I feel like I checked
was
a
your
huge
ex-
box.
This was your exit strategy?
No, hopefully
That
not.
book's
But
done. I'm ready to go, God. Take me anytime.
it definitely felt like one of the things that I was responsible for sharing. It was one of my stewardships, and so
Oh,
I wrote it so that it would help those that had some idea of this principle to expand and apply it more. And for those that it was a new principle, that it would be a good foundational jumping off point. I wrote it for men, women, college kids, teenagers. It's 68 pages. I don't think it's too overwhelming. And I really do think, the subtitle, Reframing Your Life, it does change the way you see everything, including, for what we're talking about today, our dating experiences.
Yeah, I agree. And I have to tell you, it was a beautiful read.
mhm.
And there were times when I was so touched by the Spirit and actually teared up as I was reading this. So I just thought it was fabulous and wonderful.
Thank
and
you.
I do have to point out one part of this, Bob.
Oh,
as
that sounds like a but.
Yeah, as a sufferer of ADD,
Uh-huh.
she wrote something in there that I have told my wife and my children, and she knows what this is. I can tell. And see, this is something that I had never thought about before, but this is actually true. And I'm going to have her explain what she thinks about this. But she called it the omniscience of embryonic form. And she says, this is a quote, "What if a person dealing with ADHD was sampling the taste of God's omnifocus? And just like the growth of a baby, outperceived obstacles may actually be the beginning and development of divinity. The fact that I can do multiple things at the same time is as close to divinity as you can get." How about that?
I guess you can bend, yourself into being God in
Wait.
multiple different ways. I think that's a different malady than ADHD, isn't it?
Yeah,
The-
where
the
did
God
this thought
complex,
come
is that-
from? As I know a lot of our listeners suffer from this.
Well,
and I've constantly tried to make sense of the whole thing.
Right. So I've been married for 31 years. My husband is also in that category. And then my son, my oldest, who is back at BYU, also deals with it. And it's interesting. Our son has recently returned to college. He took a good 18-month break, and has learned some tools and applied them. And as he was sharing with us we went out to dinner as a family one night, and he shared with us what he's been learning and what he's found in online support. I said to him, I'm so happy that at a future date, you will be able to share with your wife this self-awareness and where it plays in relationships specifically and how it plays out in a marriage. His dad and I didn't have that. And so it was interesting how this stewardship of ADHD affected or impacted our marriage, and still does, just like my set of stewardships impact our marriage, right? Like when we're in relationships, we bring a set of characteristics, strengths, weaknesses, and experiences.
Absolutely.
And I really do think ADHD individuals will have a leg up as we learn to be more like God, who, regardless of what your faith is, if you believe he's omnipresent and omniscient, then he's listening to a lot of his kids. He's watching a lot of things happen all at the same time. And so I do see it as a superpower, but I also have watched both my son and my husband where it's a struggle, right? And it does impact, I think, within relationships, what we're talking about today. My son has had some awareness of, like, when someone's not in front of you, they're out of mind when you're dealing with this kind of ADHD lens in the world. And so when it comes to dating, I think it's important that if you are someone that is experiencing this stewardship, or if you're dating someone that is, how that affects your communication and your dating, like your relationships, because sometimes it can feel like, are you going to text me back? Are you going to make a plan? You said you were going to do this. You didn't do it. All of those things are really characteristic or common within the ADHD experience. And if you don't have that, it can feel like someone's not keeping their promises. They're not trustworthy. They're not interested anymore. And you can tell yourself a whole story about it. And so I'm really proud of my son. I'm not going to say it's always been easy to have it be a part of, like, parenting or in my marriage. But I'm not always easy to be around either. And so it's just it's the fun of family life, right?
That's right. Wow.
Well, Lauren and we're very proud of Tom too.
Yes.
Looking at your book, The Stewardship Principle, let's step back just a minute from chapter 1. You say, I am suggesting to begin to see life through the lens of a steward instead of an owner. Stewarding means you are in charge of something, responsible to manage it, or entrusted for watch care. And so it seems that the premise of the book is a mind shift to look at life as a steward rather than an owner of your life. Do you want to explain that?
Well, I think ownership and taking ownership is kind of a buzzword right now. And so I've had some people intrigued with the premise, but what I try to say from the beginning is stewardship isn't not taking responsibility. It's not checking out of relationships, your health, your career, your education. It's actually more intentional, but it is also more empowering than an ownership mindset. When we go into ownership, we become, I'm going to speak for myself, and this is the premise of the book that I show throughout the whole book, depending on the chapter. The ownership voice in my life goes into comparisons more easily, goes into control, becomes hyper-focused on outcomes, takes away agency. It's not as expansive, versus stewarding doesn't mean I check out or I phone it in, so to speak, but it allows me to honor agency. It allows me to be more individualized and authentic. It allows for me and my faith, God, to be a part of those situations. And what I like to say is it makes all the good stuff better and all the hard stuff more doable. And that's why for the last 10 years, I've been studying this principle and applying it in my own life. And because it's a principle, it means I practice it. It doesn't mean I arrive at a place where I've mastered it. I'm always catching myself. I write the book this way, where each chapter ends with a list of stewardship voice prompts and ownership voice prompts.
Yeah,
so
I highlighted all of those.
Oh yeah. So for me, like when I'm in ownership, I just get to choose back into stewardship. It's not, I didn't fail at anything. I'm practicing it. It's a principle. And so, because of that, there's only, I could have written volumes and volumes in this book. I wanted to try to spotlight relatable and comparable stewardship so that people could take it and apply it, but expand it in their own way. Because maybe for you, you're not triggered in the health category or the body category, but you are in finances or education. And I think especially with it, or relationships. Yeah. I mean, I think I wish I had had this information when I was in the dating space of life, because I think when you are in a stewardship mindset, it's easier to show up authentically when you're in a dating situation, knowing that you're a steward over things. So for me, like in looking back, it can prevent someone from hiding a part of themselves. Instead of, like, I talk about addiction, I talk about a number of like education, body issues, health issues. When you're in a stewardship mindset, then I think you're more likely to share with someone you're dating who you really are. And instead of putting value of like good or bad, you show up in a way that says, I'm pretty aware of, like the example I said of my son, that I have a stewardship of ADHD. It's not a bad or a good thing. It's not shame-based. This is the reality. And if I'm intentional about using the tools that I've learned to steward over this diagnosis, then it can be a gift and it can be a challenge. So for example, I didn't know I had chronic illness. I didn't know until I had been married only a couple of years that I was going to be diagnosed with a major chronic illness, lupus. And the doctors at the time said I'd have 10 years to live and we'd never have children. And I've thought a lot about, like, what would I have done in the dating phase if I knew that diagnosis? Right. Mm-hmm. Like, how quickly would I have disclosed it? How would I have felt about dating my husband whose father died of MS? So we were kind of perfectly matched because we didn't know that would be a part of our marriage. And yet he had already had a life experience where he had some sensitivity and empathy and awareness of what autoimmune or chronic illness, how it manifests and changes a relationship. Right. So I think for dating life, if you have this mindset, it can take away the shame, and that fosters, I think, true connection and honesty. Instead of hiding who we are, we show up in stewardship. And it becomes the points where I make the case in the book where you may be the gift in someone else's life because you have a unique stewardship.
Now there's a couple things you've said there and a few things from your book that I'd like to mention and then kind of pivot that into our dating. And as a steward, one of the things that you talk about here is looking at the failures or challenges in your life as gifts. That even the most difficult and heartbreaking circumstances that we have in mortality can be a gift to you. And so, when we look at dating, a lot of times people seem to have more failures than they do gifts. And so many times we don't look at challenges as things that will strengthen us. You say, I'm saying that maybe more of the moments you think are messes or missed appointments really are miracles in the making. You may not know it until the next life, the impact of an unexpected change of plans. Right. So we see when it comes to relationships and datings, it's probably the most common thing that we see and that we hear from young single adults is that many times they have miscues and they have failures. Right. And sometimes those failures are polarizing for them and stops them from engaging in relationship development. And so is this part of your theory of becoming a steward, is to look at the missteps, the failures, the disappointments as gifts? Is that the mindset that you're proposing here?
Well, what I would say is that regardless of where you're at in the dating world, if you're single and trying to have relationships and whether they're romantic or friendship based only, right? I think as you approach those situations, and some of them turn out good and turn out with an outcome, like maybe they turn into a relationship where you're steadily dating the same person. Maybe they move into an engagement or maybe a marriage. Maybe they're in the friend zone for a really, really long time, right? Regardless, with the stewardship mindset, you become less focused on the outcome and you show up for the experience. And
Very important.
when that happens, that means there's losses, right? There's heartbreak, there's learning. I mean, I tried to raise my children with the idea that whoever you love teaches you about love. And so when I married their dad, I wasn't, I didn't hide the fact that I had loved other people before I had loved him.
Right.
And he didn't hide the fact that he had loved other people before he was in a relationship loving me. And because of that, most recently, my high school sweetheart, who I'm almost married, just recently died just a few weeks ago. And so it's a really tender part of my heart. He never married, he never had children of his own, and he stayed in contact with our family. And I've had him more in my mind and dating him in high school and even through college a lot lately because of his passing. And so my kids have heard me start, reshare stories I've shared over the years with them about how much I believe in that principle. So if you're in a situation where it's been traumatic or the dating didn't turn out the way you thought or the person didn't feel the same way about you, when we reframe it as stewardship, then it's about learning and it's about experience. And I keep telling my kids, I want you to have those experiences. I want you to continue to have opportunities where you get to know other people, but in return, you get to know yourself. Because if we're just outcome focused, we miss out on the learning. I think we're just trying to get to a point on the map or a goal. And then if we make dating about that, then it is going to be more frustrating. If we make it about learning, then every experience it can be of value.
Yeah, what Bob and I have been talking about for several years now is that idea that just go and meet someone, sit across from them, look in their eyes, and talk, communicate, and learn. I mean, it's a learning process. And it may, like you said, it may not turn into something. It may not be a relationship, but it's important to learn as you go through that. And even if there's heartbreak, you learn about something. And, we didn't come to this earth to have everything work out. We feel pain and sorrow. I
just asked my beautiful daughter who just moved out to go to college at Brigham Young University, and her brother is there too she's living in one of the dorms and he's living off campus in an apartment close to campus. And I asked her, and her friend was over that she went through high school with, and I said, why is dating important? They said, it literally is to figure out what you like and invest in people. And yet they said in so many situations, when you don't make it about having fun, getting out of yourself and getting to know people, then it turns into a lot of hanging out and no dating.
That's right.
And so their advice is like, I've loved watching my kids. Both of them did a pretty decent job in high school of trying to facilitate dating opportunities. And then, obviously those dynamics change a little when you go into college, but I think the principles are the same, that if you go on lots of dates and you meet lots of people, you start to learn that investment isn't lost. Like
that's
the energy.
The exact premise of our podcast.
She sounds like she knows what she's talking about.
We need to get her to come.
Wow.
We didn't even pay
She can
her.
join the It's Just Dinner
she
team.
did that for free.
Wow, she's just giving she's giving it all up for us.
That's amazing.
Now, before we get too far down on this, there's a story that you alluded to in our pre-conversation about how your name, and it's pronounced Ganel-Lyn.
No, it's pronounced
Ganel-Lyn.
Yeah.
Ganel-Lyn. And you said that your name almost destroyed your marriage. Now, you said you weren't going to explain that to me until we got on the air. So how is it that your name was almost a deal killer on your love of your life?
Okay, so for your BYU audience, some of this vernacular will sound familiar. If listeners from other faiths are listening, it may not translate. So I'm going to try to be interfaith friendly here. Good. So I was a California girl who back in the day, 35 years ago, right? Like you had to call home collect. There was no Google. There was no cell phones. There was no nothing. So my parents, I was the first in my family. I'm the oldest to go to college. So They loaded up the station wagon. Literally, we stopped in Salt Lake to get a coat at Burlington Coat Factory because we couldn't find winter clothes in California. And they drove me to Rexburg, Idaho, and dropped me off at Rick's College. And I moved into an apartment that was a townhome setup with 5 other roommates that I didn't know. Like, no one could like stalk each other on social media. So I had no idea who anyone was. I mean, like, I'm just giving you context for what we used to have to do to socialize and get to know each other, like for good or bad.
Right. Yeah.
We had 6 girls sharing one bathroom, and we go to church the first Sunday, and I remember exactly what I was wearing because my husband talks about it all the time now. But I was wearing a blue dress with white polka dots on it, and this really cute guy who ended up not being my husband. Isn't that hilarious? This really cute guy gets up, and he was dressed so nicely. And I don't know if he gave like the opening prayer at church, or I don't know what he did, but he did something that he was in front of everyone at church. The next week, the bishopric, this is where vernacular is important. The bishopric went around and met all the new apartments, right? All the people. Right. And they were trying to like get the information to set people up in family home evening groups. Mm-hmm. So my apartment complex and my husband's apartment complex was in the same ward, and they were trying to match up girl apartments with boy apartments for a family home evening group.
So those who are non-LDS, just imagine Harry Potter and the sorting hat.
Yes, it's a sorting hat. Exactly.
Okay.
Gryffindor. Sorting hat. Okay. For the weekly get-togethers, which are awkward, but yeah, right? So when the bishopric came around, they were getting to know everyone. And I'm sure your listeners can tell, if they know me from my other platforms, they know I'm not shy. My husband was newly home from his mission and was roommates with this really cute guy that I had seen at church. I don't remember seeing my husband, and he was newly home from his mission and was deathly shy. No one knows that about him now. He's an amazing accountant, CFO, but he's had 31 years of hanging out with me, and I talk to everybody. So when the bishopric came around, I said, hey, I want to put in dibs. If you're matching us up for family home evening groups, I want to be in the group with that guy. And so he happened to be my husband's roommate. So they matched us. Well, the first family home evening activity, my husband happened to be in charge of it, and he wanted to do smoothies, and they did the candy, like, get to know you game where you grab the handful of M&Ms and then you answer questions about who you are based on the color that you got in the M&Ms. And everyone in the group in the 2 apartments liked sports, and I didn't. So when it came to me, everyone had already said, like, I love sports. I love this sport. And I said, I don't like sports, but I really like keeping a clean house or something. I said something lame. Well, they had borrowed my blender to make smoothies for this family home evening activity. Now, I didn't know my husband was ADD, but what I found out later is he never would return the blender. Never. Like, I asked him for weeks to return the blender, and he wouldn't, because he was trying to figure out a really cool way to ask me out on a date. But this is where my name comes into it. He didn't know how to say my name. He could not remember how to pronounce my name. He couldn't Google me.
It is a different name. I'm
the only one in the world with it. Yeah. So he literally held on to the blender for months, and I was starting to get kind of irritated. By this point, I had gotten to know him. He was a nice guy. He was super quiet. He finds out that he finally returned my blender. Later on, he tells me why he finally turned it over to me. Is he found out I had a boyfriend back at home, which is the friend I just mentioned that just passed away. And so he ended up, this is a saga. He ended up dating my roommate for a good year because her name was Simple and her name was Amy. And
that's right.
And we stayed really good friends. And let me say this, it all worked out perfectly because for a full school year, we were really good friends. And I just got to know him he sang a cappella. He was in barbershop. He was the guy that gave us priesthood blessings. He had a car, so he would go pick up our groceries because we didn't have cars. And we just became really good friends. Fast forward to the next school year.
Did he ever learn how to say your name?
He did learn how to say my name.
Did he just call you, hey, you? Or
No. He learned how to say my name. And the next year, he and Amy broke up. My boyfriend, who ended up being his roommate for a while, we broke up. And and that's the end of the story that began the story of us being
There you
more
go.
than friends. So
But now the big question though is, in your marriage, did you guys have a blender?
we now have 2 blenders. We just got a
Okay, well,
second
there you
blender
go.
last
There you
week.
go.
Phew, I
That's
was
a
wondering
really
how
good
that was
point.
going to come out.
That's a really good idea. We should make smoothies this weekend
Yeah, I
because now
think
we're
you
empty
should,
nesters and we
now.
should
Yeah, there
mark
you go.
that.
Celebrate.
Yeah.
Celebrate with smoothies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, we're glad that all worked out, and we're glad that your husband can now pronounce your name correctly. That is one of the things in dating. Learn how to pronounce the other person's name.
Yeah.
Yeah, and don't be
Yeah.
afraid to ask.
Now with
think
someone with a somewhat difficult name, where you've probably heard it pronounced numerous different times, because looking at
a
it,
million times.
are you offended when someone says, "Nah, how do you pronounce your name?"
No, but listen, I'm going to say this. At all the important points in my life, it's been mispronounced. So when I graduated from college, it was not pronounced correctly. When we were married in the temple, for those that are LDS, the sealer never said it right. And so we jokingly say that we're polygamous because he was
Because he
sealed
married
to
so many different
Just
people.
yeah,
Three
6
different
other
ones.
women. None
So-
of them
so what
were
is the most common mispronunciation of your name?
Ganel, probably Ganel.
Ganel?
Yeah.
Well, I could see that. I think that's what
But
I call it.
phonetically, if you see it spelled Ganel, it's phonetically Ganel-Lyn long A. So
Ganel-Lyn.
Ganel-Lyn, and it's
Okay.
hyphenated, and so that confuses people because there's grammar in it, and what do you do with the grammar? So
Okay.
it's fine when you try to have a website or an Instagram account
Right.
and a YouTube channel, but in junior high, it's hell. Can I say that?
I bet
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah,
And so,
real.
what kind of relationship do you have with your mom and dad? Are you holding this against them? Right now,
Well, my mom's middle name is Ganel, and my great grandma's name was Ganel, and then they added the hyphen Lynn, and so I
It's a
don't tell your
family
kids
name.
what you were going to name them, because my dad's name is Daniel and they were going to name me Danielle. And I always say all the cute girls are always named Danielle. Why didn't you fight harder to have me named after you, Dad? And
all the cute girls in my experience are named Ganel. That's what
thank you.
And so, did you name your daughters Ganel? Did
No.
you carry on? What's that? Why not? You didn't carry
Because
on the tradition.
it was too much of a stewardship. It was a heavy stewardship.
Now we
There.
get back.
Right
We've
back
come
to
full
where
circle.
we're-
Yeah.
Right back to where we're
Okay,
supposed
good,
to be.
good
Yeah,
job. But
my
bring
daughter
us
has
back home.
my daughter has a combination name of my husband's middle name Brooks and my first name Ganel-Lyn, so she's Brooklyn.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, and then I have a son. I have just 2 children. I have a boy and a girl, and so I always tell them I'm going to love whoever they marry, because I can't hide the in-laws I don't like with the in-laws that I do like. It's going to be obvious.
That's right.
Well, there you go.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
gonna reel you back in here just a little bit, Bob. Is that okay?
Well, it's your show.
Because I have
And
I have 2 really
I'm
important
just the
questions that I
sidekick
want to
here.
ask.
Yeah.
I have
before
no
we let it go.
authority in this.
We have a good amount of young people and older people that listen to our show that have a real fear of relationships or of dating. And what happens because of that fear or insecurities, they stay in their apartment. And they don't go out, they don't interact. And Bob and I over the years have talked about how church culture and the culture we live in has caused a lot of that. But what would you say to those people who are either they claim they're busy or they're afraid or there are other obstacles in the way of them getting out and meeting people and experiencing some of these things?
Well, I would first say, from a mental health standpoint, those that know me know I do a lot of work in the mental health area. I had a sister die at the age of 40 of suicide, and so I'm sensitive to mental health issues and struggles. And I would just say that I would get below what is it that you're afraid of. So when you're clear about what the fear is, if it's fear of rejection, is it fear of, is it just anxiety because it's generalized anxiety around the socializing aspect of that? Then once you can identify what makes you afraid, I think you can set things up in a way that allow you to move the needle. I think sometimes we believe that if we are free of fear, then we're in courage. But to me, courage always shows up in the face of fear. I write about this in one of my other books, Let God Prevail, that fear is just not it's just not giving fear the last word in the situation. And so if you're waiting for there to be no fear, I don't believe that's being courageous. And I think the reality is we all walk into social situations with our own story in our head. So I would ask the individual to get clear on what is the story you're telling yourself about how you fit in the dating world, and then start to construct things in a way that feel more doable. So maybe for you it's meeting for swig, because it's not a full commitment to, I mean, not to take away from the name of your podcast, it's not a full dinner, it's not a whole meal.
No,
And
we've said it's just swig many times.
it's just swig, it's just
It
swig,
could be it's just anything.
Yeah.
right?
It could
It's
be
just
it's just the M&M game, or it's just
yeah,
the
it's just
blender.
game night, right? Like
It's just a blend.
my husband and I are in an interesting phase as empty nesters. We've realized we've let our kind of double dating game get a little lazy when we were raising our kids, and now we're starting to realize that we need to have other relationships with couples that are maybe in a similar time of life. And so we're trying to talk through, what does that look like to create connection? And I would say make it about connection, and realize that everyone that you're dating or you're interacting with is also showing up with a story in their heads. You know, I know some of the really famous, really well-known, really accomplished individuals, and I count them as friends. And it's interesting to hear on a friend level what people say to themselves about themselves, while the world has a different story about who they are.
Right.
And so realize that, like, in the same way that I've gone back to high school reunions and realized that everyone was more worried about what their outfit was, and they didn't even remember what my outfit was that day. Most of the time, we're not really spending as much time thinking about the other person, or people aren't really spending that much time thinking about us as we are thinking about ourselves.
That's a good point.
So if you can take it a
was
little less
it was
serious.
the blue dress with the polka dots on it.
Right, exactly.
And so let me give you a real world experience here so we can kind of drill down. Many people, when they date, when you talk about fear of rejection, that's very high on the list, especially for a lot of young men, because they don't have a lot of experience dating before. So we all have certain insecurities about our looks or our weight or how smart we are or our hair color or everything. And so many times when we venture out and we ask someone out and we get rejected, sometimes that fear can be overwhelming to people, can be paralyzing to people, because then it just reinforces all the negative impressions they have of themselves in all those areas. So what would you recommend to someone who has fallen into that rejection, polarization, hurt, to help them to move forward? Because sometimes that's the fact we see that is probably the most common reason that people don't date, is because of that, not necessarily the fear of rejection, but the experience of rejection.
So I would say every person on the planet deals with some mental health issues. And so the reality is, if your anxiety is based in experience where there has been enough rejection that you have evidence in your mind of it failing, I would reframe, not to just plug that, but reframe the experience of dating. Can you make it about service? Can you make it about connection? So if the rejection has come on this like really one-on-one base, I would say dial it back just a little bit so that you're fostering connection in your life. Wow, and when we do that, we are wired for connection. But if we've had enough rejection, it is just like in the animal kingdom. It's easy to like close in and cover up in the vulnerable places of our hearts. And so just like an animal doesn't expose usually their underbelly, we literally as humans cover up our hearts because we don't want to be exposed and out there in the world. I just read something though that I thought was so interesting, that redwoods in these big redwood forests, the root systems become intertwined in each other so that they become stronger, because the root systems of one tree intertwine in the root systems of another tree. And I'm not trying to say that we need to be codependent of each other, but if you have experienced rejection, find a partner in this. Like my son was great at this in high school. He and his buddy would make it a goal to ask as many girls out on dates, and they would plan these really fun dates together. I think individually they would have been more nervous, but the fact they were doing it together,
right.
My daughter did the same thing. And so maybe for you, it's the one-on-one that is the most vulnerable. Don't jump straight to that. jump to, do you already have a good friend that's willing to take their insecurities and plan something with you?
Yeah.
When it's a double date situation, it takes some of that one-on-one vulnerability away, but it's still fostering connection with some, like in the bowling terms, some bumper pads.
So where this podcast was kind of born was that idea of connections. And what Bob and I have tried to tell people is, look, don't necessarily date. Just go make a connection. Just go make a friend. Just sit across and talk to someone and make a friend. It doesn't have to be about dating and relationships and marriage and all those things. I just really quick, I wanted to ask you one more thing, and that was, rejection is part of the problem with some people in dating. The other problem that we see here in our culture is that I have to marry every person that I date. Mm-hmm. And if I go on a date with her, that means we're going to get married. Or if he asks me on a date,
you should look at every person you date as a potential marriage partner, which is
that's danger. I mean, that's what we hear all the time, and
sets you up for failure.
And so a lot of young men and young women will not date because they're afraid that everyone is going to stigmatize them as, you're a couple now, you're going to date. What would you say to those people who are really afraid of dating because they don't want to get in a relationship and that will cause them to get married?
So I asked my kids about this that are both in this phase of life. And as we were talking, they re-quoted me back to me, and they just said, Mom, you've always taught us like to marry your best friend, and that everyone you have relationships with is about your learning, and you don't lose it, you carry it forward. And so for me, though, one of the things that came to mind as I was talking to them is, because they're both in college right now, they're taking classes that aren't necessarily what their major is or what their career is, right? My daughter is doing a lot of generals. My son has changed majors a few times. And so I gave the analogy, every class they take isn't their career. Like, my daughter's taking social dance and astronomy and psychology. My son is taking an accounting class. His dad is so proud, but he's wants to be an illustration major, right? And so in the same way, can you look at dating in that way, that every class you take in college isn't your career, but it's part of the experience of getting your degree. And I think there's value in seeing that each person you meet in the world, whether you are in a relationship, dating them, or marry them, has something to offer you in part of their experiences and their learning that they're going to have with you. And so when we, I will be surprised if my daughter decides she wants to go into astronomy, but she's taking it this year. And so I hope she's open-minded when she takes the class, not thinking, well, this isn't worth anything because I've got to show up now every week for the next semester. And this isn't even my career. That's the value of it, is general eds are about that. Can we general ed date a little bit more and not assume that every class we're taking is our career, every person we're dating is a relationship?
What a great analogy.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use that from
Good.
now on.
Now,
I may not quote you on that.
I think you should, because that would be plagiarism. So this has been a fascinating discussion, and I just want to kind of circle back, Ganel-Lyn Condie, to your book and tell all our listeners why they should buy it.
It's $8 or cheaper depending on where you buy it. Amazon.
The inexpensiveness of the book isn't the thing, but here I want to, in one of your chapters here, you have this, and I want to read this because I just think this was so poignant to me. As Mother Teresa once said, this is what you say in your book, quote, "I am a little pencil in the hand of a writing God who is sending a love letter to the world. In the end, it won't be about the book sales or church callings, YouTube subscriptions, or awards. Making a difference will be about showing up."
Great quote.
And I just love that thought because it ties so well into what we talk about in the dating world, that the success is doing it. The success is just showing up, and you got to just keep trying. You got to keep meeting people, keep going to dinner, keep going to make smoothies in the blender, keep going to, getting a drink together and meeting people and having conversations.
Absolutely.
And you know what? I'm getting emotional as you're talking because I'm thinking about my high school sweetheart who's passed. I don't regret anything. I don't regret that we've stayed friends. I don't regret that we were once in love and we dated. I don't regret that we made sure we made time to stay connected to each other. My husband would stay connected with him as well. Um, because you don't know, not to be overly dramatic as a 51-year-old empty nester, but life is short and life can change in a moment's notice. And when we make life about connection and people, it's messy. It really is messy sometimes. And dating is messy and it's awkward and it's vulnerable. But I'm so grateful for the
But
people and the
it is fun.
relationships. It's fun.
It is
It's
fun.
fun. It's fun. And it's fun learning to date my husband again after, entering a new phase and season. And we're learning about each other because we're not like stagnant in time. We're not frozen in time. The people we were 30 years ago when we married are not the people we are now. And
That's right.
so I think when we make space for each other to grow, to mess up, to make mistakes, to try, but if we make it about people and connection, I think it demystifies and it takes the charge and the fear and the anxiety down just a little bit. Like I've been invited to some big events coming up, and I realized today that I was triggered in my head. That old junior high part of my head was loud and awake of like, who's going to invite me to sit by them at the table kind of feeling. And I thought, isn't that interesting? After all the events and all the experiences I've had, there's still that part of me. And so I had to get really clear that I am having those opportunities because I want and value the connection. And that's what it's about.
Very wise words.
Yes.
Okay, this was Ganel-Lyn Condie. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having
Tell
me.
everyone where they can get your book. Where is it?
Well, the good thing of having a weird name is that Google knows exactly who you're trying to find. And so my website is my name, Ganel-Lyn.com, and 2 L's. And all the links to all my platforms are right there on my website. And they can get my book on Amazon, Siegel Book, and Deseret Books, sometimes at Costco, but not always.
Well, it's just a fabulous book.
Yes, thank you
and
so much.
We really appreciate you spending some time with us. Just very wise words. I'd encourage you to go get the book. It is just an amazing read. And thank you again for being on a part of our podcast and really helping people understand about the stewardship principle and how that can really change their life and affect your life. Thank you guys for listening. You can always reach us at, and I have a new email address, Bob.
Get out. This is the third year we got a new
It's
email.
Just Dinner Podcast at gmail.com.
Wow,
So you can get us, you can talk to us there. Also, don't forget our Instagram page. It's Just Dinner YSA, and we have a TikTok. It's Just Dinner. So at TikTok. So go there, and we've got some fun stuff out there for you to listen to. And always please make comments and get us involved in your lives as well. Thanks for listening. And hey, just go have fun out there, would you?